They said some dogs forget their training, but the truth is some dogs remember too much, and Rex was one of them. A Navy SEAL K9 who hadn't obeyed a single command in over 6 months, pacing inside a reinforced steel enclosure at the edge of a quiet military base in northern Montana, his claws tapping against the concrete in a slow, deliberate rhythm that echoed like a ticking clock. His amber eyes fixed not on the handlers who kept their distance, not on the floodlights humming overhead, but on the dark line of pine trees stretching beyond the fence, as if something out there was calling him back, something unfinished. And at exactly 2:17 every morning, without fail, he would stop, ears rising, body going still, the air around him tightening in a way no one could explain, as though the world itself was holding its breath. And then he would let out a low, almost human sound, not a bark, not a growl, but something deeper, something that carried memory, and that was why they called. Ethan Cole, a former Army K9 handler who had spent years learning how to read the silence between a dog's movements, a man who knew that behavior like this wasn't defiance. It was a message, even if no one else believed it anymore. He arrived just before dusk, his old pickup crunching over gravel as the wind moved through the trees and long, whispering waves, carrying the scent of pine and cold metal. And when he stepped out, he didn't go straight to the enclosure. He stood still first, listening the way he used to in places where silence could mean danger or something waiting to be found. Rex noticed him immediately, but didn't react the way the reports described. No lunging, no snapping, just a quiet shift, the dog turning his head slightly, watching Ethan with an intensity that felt less like threat and more like recognition, as if he had been expecting someone like him to finally show up. And when Ethan moved closer, slow and steady, boots crunching softly against gravel, Rex didn't back away. He didn't advance either. He simply held his ground, eyes locked, unblinking, like a sentry guarding a secret he didn't know how to explain. The handlers nearby exchanged uneasy glances, one of them whispering that the dog had done this before, frozen like that, waiting for something that never came. But Ethan didn't answer because he could feel it too now, a subtle tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks or a memory surfaces, something just beneath the surface of understanding. And when the wind shifted slightly, carrying a faint sound from the forest beyond, Rex's ears twitched. And for the first time that evening, his body leaned forward, just an inch, as if the line between past and present had started to blur. And somewhere out there, hidden beneath layers of time and silence, something was still waiting to be found. The night settled deeper over the base, the kind of cold that crept slowly through layers of fabric and bone, and Ethan remained standing just outside the enclosure, watching Rex as the last light faded behind the trees, the floodlights flickering on with a low electrical hum that seemed too loud for a place this quiet. And still the dog did not move the way a restless animal would. No pacing, no agitation, just that steady focus toward the forest, as if time itself bent in that direction. One of the handlers approached, keeping a careful distance, explaining in a hushed voice that every attempt to relocate Rex had failed, that the dog would resist without aggression, but with an unshakable refusal, planting himself like something rooted, something that belonged to a different place, a different moment. And Ethan listened without interrupting, his gaze never leaving the animal, because he had seen something like this before, not in dogs that had forgotten commands, but in those that were still following one, a command that had never been released. And as the temperature dropped and a thin layer of frost began to form along the fence line, Ethan stepped closer, close enough now that he could see the subtle rise and fall of Rex's chest, the slow, controlled breathing of a soldier who had learned patience the hard way. And then, without warning, Rex shifted just slightly, his head tilting as if catching a distant sound carried on the wind. Ethan followed the movement, instinctively turning toward the trees, but there was nothing there, only darkness and the faint whisper of branches brushing against each other. Yet something about the moment lingered, like a sentence that had not finished speaking, and then it happened again, that strange alignment of stillness, the air tightening, the world narrowing, and Ethan checked his watch almost without thinking. 2:17 in the morning, the same time noted in every report, and Rex stood perfectly still, ears forward, body alert but calm, not reacting to the present but listening to something beyond it, something that existed just out of reach. And Ethan felt it then, not as a sound but as a memory pressing at the edge of awareness, the kind that comes back without permission, a night years ago when he had stood in silence beside another dog, waiting for a signal that never came. And for a brief moment, the distance between then and now seemed to collapse, and Rex let out that low, quiet sound again, softer this time, almost like recognition, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone, the tension easing, the air returning, the world expanding back to its ordinary shape, and Rex lowered his head slightly, not defeated, not tired, just waiting again, as if whatever he had been listening for had not arrived yet. And Ethan exhaled slowly, realizing that this was not about control, it was about understanding, because somewhere beyond that line of trees, something had started long before this night, and whatever it was, Rex had not given up on it. Morning came slowly, not with sunlight, but with a pale gray haze that settled over the base like a quiet hesitation. And Ethan had not slept. He remained near the enclosure with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hand, watching Rex as the dog sat facing the same line of trees, unmoving, as if the night had never ended for him. The frost along the fence had melted into thin drops of water that slid down the metal in silence. And somewhere in the distance a flag snapped lightly in the wind, a small reminder that the world outside this moment continued forward. Even if something here was still waiting to catch up, one of the handlers approached again, slower this time, less certain, mentioning that a civilian had been visiting the base housing area recently, a young girl who often wandered near the training grounds, always quiet, always watching, and Ethan barely nodded, his attention still fixed on Rex, because the dog's posture had changed just enough to matter. The tension in his shoulders had softened, not relaxed, but receptive, like a door left slightly open, and then Ethan heard it, not from the forest this time, but from behind him, the soft crunch of small footsteps on gravel, light and uneven, followed by the faint rustle of fabric brushing against itself. He turned slowly and saw her standing a few yards away, no more than 8 years old, wearing a faded blue jacket that hung a little too large on her frame, her hair tied loosely at the back, strands catching the morning light. And she did not look at Ethan. She looked at Rex, not with fear, not with curiosity, but with a kind of quiet understanding that felt older than her years. The handler started to say something to stop her, but Ethan raised a hand without looking, a silent signal to wait, because something about this moment felt precise, like a line that had been drawn long ago and was only now being completed. The girl stepped forward slowly, each step deliberate, the gravel shifting softly beneath her shoes, and Rex noticed immediately, his ears lifting, his body leaning forward just slightly, not defensive, not aggressive, but attentive in a way Ethan had not seen before. The air seemed to hold again, that same narrowing, that same quiet pressure building beneath the surface of everything, and the girl stopped just outside the enclosure, close enough now that her reflection faintly touched the metal bars. She did not speak at first. She simply stood there, breathing softly, her hand resting at her side, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something Ethan could not fully hear, just a few gentle words carried by the wind, and Rex responded instantly, not with movement but with stillness, so complete it felt like the world had paused around him. His eyes softened, the sharp edge of alertness giving way to something deeper, something familiar, and then the girl did what no one else had been able to do. She stepped closer and slowly reached out her hand, placing it gently against the cold metal between them, and Rex moved forward to meet it, pressing his head lightly against the barrier, not resisting, not hesitating, just connecting, as if he had finally found the signal he had been waiting for. And Ethan felt it then, a quiet shift, not in the dog, but in the story itself, like a door opening to something hidden just beneath the surface, something that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment, the right voice, the right presence to bring it back into the light. The handler finally unlocked the outer gate, the metallic click echoing sharper than it should have in the quiet morning air, and Ethan stepped inside slowly, every movement measured, not out of fear, but out of respect for something fragile that could not be seen. The girl remained just outside, her hands still resting lightly against the cold bars, and Rex shifted his weight, eyes moving between her and Ethan as if connecting two pieces of something that had been separated for far too long. The ground beneath Ethan's boots felt firm but carried the faint dampness of thawing frost, and the scent of pine drifted in from the trees beyond, subtle but persistent, like a memory that refused to fade. Ethan stopped a few feet from Rex, lowering himself slightly, not reaching out yet, allowing the moment to settle, because he understood now that this was not about control or commands. This was about trust returning in its own time. And Rex took a step forward, slow and deliberate, his head lowering just enough to show something had changed, not broken, not surrendered, but opened. And then Ethan noticed it, a faint tremor in the dog's breathing, not from fear but from recognition, the kind that comes when something long buried begins to surface. The girl spoke again, softly, the same quiet tone as before, and though Ethan still could not make out every word, he caught the rhythm of it, gentle, familiar, like a phrase repeated long ago under different skies, and Rex responded by closing his eyes for just a second, a brief, almost invisible gesture that carried more meaning than any command ever could. And then, without warning, he turned his body toward the forest, muscles tightening with a new kind of purpose, not restless, not lost, but guided, and Ethan felt the shift immediately, that subtle pull in the air, like a direction revealing itself. Rex moved toward the far side of the enclosure, stopping at the edge where the fence line met the shadow of the trees, his nose lifting slightly, catching something carried on the wind, and then he looked back at Ethan, not as an animal awaiting instruction, but as a partner asking to be followed, the kind of look Ethan had not seen since his days in the field, when every movement mattered and every signal meant something beyond words. The handler outside called out, uncertain, asking what was happening, but Ethan did not answer because he already knew this was the moment everything changed. He moved to the gate, opening it fully now, and for a second Rex hesitated, not out of doubt, but as if marking the line between what had been and what was about to begin. Then he stepped through, crossing that invisible boundary with quiet certainty. The girl watched without moving, her expression calm, almost knowing, as if she had seen this unfold before in a way no one else could understand. And as Rex reached the open ground beyond the enclosure, he did not run wildly or look back in confusion. He moved forward with purpose, straight toward the tree line, each step steady, guided by something deeper than instinct, and Ethan followed without hesitation, the gravel giving way to soft earth beneath his boots, the sound of the bass fading behind him, replaced by the low whisper of wind through branches. And for the first time since he arrived, he realized that whatever they were about to find had never been lost. It had simply been waiting for someone to listen. The forest welcomed them without sound, the kind of silence that felt alive rather than empty. And as Ethan stepped beneath the tall pines, the air shifted, cooler, heavier with the scent of damp earth and old needles. Rex moved ahead with quiet certainty, not rushing, not hesitating, each step placed as if he had walked this exact path before, though no record said he had ever been here. And that was what unsettled Ethan the most, not fear, but the feeling that this place already knew them. The ground softened underfoot, pine needles layering the earth in a thick, quiet carpet that muted every sound except the faint rhythm of breathing and the occasional whisper of wind threading through the branches above. Sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, breaking into thin beams that drifted between trunks like something searching for its way down. And Rex stopped suddenly, his body going still in that same way Ethan had seen before. But this time there was no hesitation, only focus. He lowered his head and began to move in a slow circle, nose close to the ground, tracing something invisible yet precise. And Ethan stepped closer, watching carefully because this was not random. This was memory unfolding, the kind that lived not in words, But in instinct, Rex paused near a patch of earth where the pine needles lay thicker than the rest, undisturbed, as if the forest itself had been protecting whatever lay beneath. And then he began to dig, not frantically, not wildly, but with steady, deliberate movements, each motion measured, controlled, purposeful, the sound of disturbed soil soft but unmistakable in the stillness. Ethan knelt beside him, brushing away loose needles with his hand, feeling the ground give slightly beneath his touch. And within moments his fingers met something solid, not stone, not root, but metal, cold even through the thin layer of earth. He cleared more carefully now, revealing the corner of a small, weathered box, its surface worn by time, but intact, as if it had been waiting patiently beneath the weight of years. Rex stepped back then, watching, his breathing steady, but his eyes fixed on the object with a depth that carried more than simple curiosity, and Ethan felt it again, that quiet pull. The sense that this moment was not chance, but continuation. He lifted the box slowly, brushing away the last of the dirt, the hinges stiff but not broken, and for a second he did not open it. He simply held it, aware that whatever was inside had once mattered enough to be hidden, to be protected, to be remembered. And the forest seemed to lean closer, the air still, the light dimmed as a cloud passed overhead, and Ethan finally opened it, the lid creaking softly as it gave way, revealing contents that spoke of a life paused rather than ended, a set of carefully folded papers, a worn military identification tag, and beneath them, a photograph, slightly faded but still clear enough to see a man in uniform standing beside a young girl, both smiling in a way that felt untouched by time, and Ethan's breath slowed as he studied the image, something about it pulling at a place he could not immediately name. Rex lowered himself beside the box, resting his head gently near its edge, not guarding it, not claiming it, but honoring it, as if the search he had carried for so long had finally reached its end. And yet, as Ethan looked deeper, he realized this was not an ending at all. It was the beginning of a story that had been waiting to be told. The forest remained still as Ethan carefully lifted the photograph from the metal box, brushing a thin layer of dirt from its surface with the edge of his sleeve, and as the image cleared, the details sharpened in a way that felt almost deliberate, as if time itself had preserved it for this exact moment. The man in uniform stood tall beside a young girl, no older than 8, her hand wrapped around his, both of them smiling with a kind of quiet certainty that spoke of trust, of something unspoken yet deeply understood, and Ethan felt a subtle shift inside him, a recognition that did not come from memory, but from instinct, the kind that lives beneath logic. He turned the photograph slightly, letting the filtered light pass over it, and noticed faint writing along the bottom edge, numbers and letters worn but still legible, coordinates, followed by a single phrase written in careful, deliberate strokes. "Wait for me." And the words lingered longer than they should have, echoing in the silence like something unfinished. Beside him, Rex exhaled slowly, lowering his head until it rested against the earth, his eyes no longer searching but holding, as if the answer he had carried for so long was finally within reach. Ethan placed the photograph back into the box and reached for the folded papers beneath, unfolding them one by one, each page marked with time, the ink slightly faded but steady, the handwriting consistent, controlled, belonging to someone who had learned to remain calm even when the world around them was anything but. The first page contained a simple report, mission details stripped down to essentials. But the further he read, the more personal the words became, the structure loosening, the tone shifting, until it was no longer a report at all, but a message, written not for command, but for someone who mattered beyond duty, references to a daughter waiting back home, promises made before deployment. And then, the final page, shorter than the rest, a single paragraph that seemed to hold more weight than all the others combined. Ethan read it slowly, each word settling into place with quiet certainty. The man had hidden this box before a mission he had not returned from, leaving behind coordinates not for recovery, but for remembrance, a place where something important had been left unfinished. And as Ethan lowered the paper, he understood Rex had not been lost. He had been waiting, not for orders, not for release, but for this moment, for someone to follow the path that had been left behind, a path that led not just to a buried box, but to a promise that had never been fulfilled. The wind shifted gently through the trees, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper moving through branches, and Ethan looked up, his gaze following the direction Rex had faced so many times before, deeper into the forest, beyond where they now stood. And Rex lifted his head again, not with urgency, but with quiet readiness, his eyes meeting Ethan's for a brief second, and in that look there was no confusion, no resistance, only a clear and steady understanding. This was not the end of the search. It was the next step, and whatever waited. Beyond that point had been waiting far longer than either of them had realized.